ladies, we thought it would be a great idea to start having conversations around books that we love, around podcasts that we like, around just conversations that need to be had in and through our practice, right? Being therapists, being moms, being church members, being daughters, being all these different roles that we thought it'd be really wise for us to kind of take a book. Today we're going to take The Anxious Generation and just talk about the introduction, kind of what we thought about it, because it is pretty meaty of a book and I think it deserves kind of a breakdown. So we'll take this into several different kind of videos and series just to kind of engage with it. Sound good?
Yeah.
What do y'all even think about having a conversation about just the material that we ingest as therapists, right? What do y'all think about that?
I think the topic of anxiety is very prevalent right now
Yeah.
in culture and in clients' lives. It seems like it's everywhere and something that needs to be discussed and addressed, and even removing like a lot of the stigma or even fear behind it, and being able to provide some clarity for ourselves and others too.
Yeah, and we talked about this. These are conversations, not that we are, yes, we're all professionals being LPCs, but we are not experts in every field, and this is an informal way that we can kind of engage in this, that we can learn from groupthink of one another, and just, again, do a review of our experiences of reading this book. I think that's, a really good bouncing off of, anxiety's prevalent, right? Depression's prevalent right now when we're talking about particular generations. So, well, good. Well, let's get started. I like how Jonathan Haidt, right? Is that how you say his name? We were contemplating how do you pronounce this name. I'm sure others struggle with this. But he wrote in the caption below his title, The Anxious Generation, how the great rewiring of childhood is causing an epidemic of mental health. And I thought it'd be wise as we, kind of start the introduction to break down and define just a couple of those words for references for us. The first one being epidemic, right? Widespread trend in culture and communities. Would anybody add or take away or have any nuance to that?
Yeah, I think there's some nuance to an epidemic being mostly negative. Like when we're talking about an epidemic, I think often we think it's negative, as anxiety is in this case.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think the most recent one that we all kind of experienced together was COVID, right? That clearly had a negative connotation to it. Everyone's experiences were some of the same, but a lot of hurt and into that. So yeah, I would say the same for sure. Sorry, more buttons. I don't know how to turn off technology. The second one being mental health. That's kind of highlighted in this. The particulars highlighted in this book are anxiety and depression. We know that mental health it can be a variation of lots of different things, but I wanted to kind of get a running definition of kind of how we frame it a little bit. Mental health is dealing with the whole person, emotions, physical, psychological, spiritual, and social well-being. It's a vital part of health and well-being that kind of helps people cope with the way they deal with stress, the way they learn, the way they work, kind of balancing life. Anything to add to that?
I think something important to highlight there that you had mentioned was that it addresses the whole person.
Yeah.
And there's no one specific factor that maybe you can distinguish like from the others, but there are social factors, physical factors, emotional, like everything is kind of interacting with one another, and mental health kind of encompasses all of those different areas for holistic well-being.
Yes, yeah, gosh, I can't imagine reading this book and just picking one of those and kind of highlighting or focusing on it, but going, even as we see clients of going, we have to look at the whole person in all aspects of that to see how is this person doing in all aspects of that help with an outcome or a goal that they're looking towards. So agreed, that huge emphasis on that. So the introduction of this book kind of goes into some scary statistics, right? A lot of parents have told me that sometimes they avoid reading books like this because right off the bat, the statistics are scary, right? They're talking about high suicide, they're talking about high children going into rehab and or into therapy, what we do, that Gen Z kind of middle schooler, high schooler, college. I know there's nuance to that too, because even some of y'all are classified maybe in the Gen Z, so talk about that. But that's kind of the population he's highlighting, but he starts off with a lot of statistics, right? A lot of current statistics that we're dealing with.
Part of why I actually find this conversation valuable, and I'm hopeful for clients who engage with it, is that while these statistics can be daunting, my hope is that as we dialogue about what we're reading here, there are practical elements that they can implement, so it's not so, like, I don't know, daunting to dive into it, but you can walk away with the practical things that can make for a different story in your own family or in your own life.
Yeah, and I love that you pinpoint the practicality of it, because I think as we were talking about anxiety being so prevalent right now, there can be so many voices and there can be just so much noise around a topic. But I really enjoyed the way that he kind of systematically and very research-based walked through the material in a way that does lead to really practical responses and ones that can still be adapted to what is going to work for your family and work for yourself as you process through what anxiety has looked like and the ways that the digital age has contributed to that.
And I think another piece that you had named in what you just said too, Jen, is that it addresses Gen Z and millennial, and there is kind of this obscure continuum, because for Quinn and I, we would maybe be at the very beginning of Gen Z or the very end of millennial, and there are different factors at play there of, in our homes growing up, how much exposure we had to phones or smartphones specifically. I remember going to dinner with a family friend, and they were wealthier and they had just gotten the brand new iPhone, and we were all looking at it in 2008 and passing it around, engaging with it. We're all what? And I remember that moment. And also I remember having a conversation with my parents of that is a lot of access to information, and my parents had very guarded parameters around technology. When I was growing up, I didn't have social media until high school, and didn't really, my brother and I tried to share a cell phone for a while. That didn't go well. but no internet access on it, or the laptop was plugged in downstairs. And I do feel for parents, because you're exposed to this huge thing without a lot of guidance on it, that also has such a huge impact on children's brains and their development, and trying to navigate through that can feel overwhelming. And so, but going back to the generational divide, there are a lot of factors at play of how much guidance did your family have around those things, what did that look like, or not look like, and what does your relationship with technology look like as you're moving through life and development. So
yeah, I think that's, even as you said 2008, I think, oh my gosh, I was married in 2008 and I had a child in 2011, and I just think, oh my gosh, even my generation of not knowing how to put parameters on it for kids. We didn't know the consequences of what it was going to do. And so much grace into the system of parenting, of going, and that's the beauty too. We haven't, if you're, reading this book and feeling anxious about all the statistics and have fear rather than go to man, there is grace, and there are things that we can do to rewire back the brain. God gave us brains that change. He gave us hearts that change. He gave us bodies that change. And there's so much redemption in that. And so as I was reading that first chapter, I was getting overwhelmed. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so I feel like there has to be that truth of going, it can also change
Mhm.
differently
Mhm.
from the trajectory in which it's going, and I think that's important. And so talked about particular Gen Zs and millennials in that age. He talks about causes of this, which I think is helpful for people, and kind of argues that smartphones and social media and the introduction of those two things in young kids' lives is what's starting the rewiring of the brain, right? And so again, we didn't know what was going to happen, right? Yeah, what would you even say to that? We didn't know, you know?
Yeah, I would say, so social media, what became a thing for me in junior high, that was something that my family was navigating as an oldest, and so there was no norms around it because nobody had really waded through those waters before,
Yeah.
culturally, socially, or even in our family. And so again, kind of thinking about that grace for people as that was the first time that was relevant in our family, but for people raising kids now, it's the first time that they've raised kids in the environment where the technology is what it is now. And so the word grace comes to mind, that there's grace in the approach that we take, but there's also grace in the way that God designed us, that the habits that we've gotten into, they can be changed.
Yeah. Yeah. So and he in the argument through not argument, but he argues these causalities, and the two challenges he also brings up is he talks about this idea of play-based childhood, which what's ringing in my head is my mom. She's one of 10, and she said that her mom would be like, just go outside. And they would just go outside and they would play. And actually, this was a large part of my childhood. She did the same. Go outside and, go figure out life in a play environment, which is the outside, versus the phone-based childhood. He kind of defines and puts those two claims and challenges, right? And then he goes into kind of these 4 points that we'll talk about. But what do you think about that? The child-based play versus the phone, right? Yeah.
I actually highlighted this part in my book because I found that to be really profound, those distinctions of play-based versus phone-based. And so really what he's talking about when he's talking about real world versus virtual world, there are 4 elements to each. So real world being embodied, so like you're interacting with your body with someone else's body, versus disembodied, so like days like chatting on AIM with my super cool screen name.
What is AIM?
Like AOL Instant Messenger.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Don't even know those.
Yes. And so then there's synchronous versus asynchronous. So synchronous is it's happening in real time, what we're doing right now, versus asynchronous, which is like I can fire off a text and someone can take however much time they would like to respond to it. Then there's one-to-one or one-to-several communication, or one-to-many communication. So one-to-one is what we're doing right now. We can't be having another conversation, doing something else outside of this. Whereas if you're texting people, then you can be texting, I could be texting Jen, Mariah, and Quinn all separately, having several different conversations at once. And then the 4th bit is high bar for entry and exit versus low bar for entry and exit. So low bar being like you can just walk away, exit a text message. If something upsets you, you don't have to engage with it. Versus high bar being you're motivated to invest in the relationships and repair rifts when they happen. So like you're making things right, you're repairing in your relationships.
Yeah.
Well, it's fascinating. Sorry.
No, go. It's fascinating.
It's fascinating what each of those does in our like the trajectory of each of those things. If we think about what it looks like to be disembodied and asynchronous, like that is, there's no potential for feedback. So if I say something to you and you have a weird face back, like you're like, oh, I didn't like that. That is immediate, like, information for me to either check in with you, to respond in so many different ways that could be beneficial to our relationship, versus a text message, sending it, not getting to see the response or the reaction, asynchronous, so even not in the right timing. So maybe a few hours later, you respond back, hey, I didn't like that. Like all of those things are no longer operating how they're intended to operate. They're they're disembodied, they're disingenuous, they're, what was the last one? Or that person not even responding back.
Yeah.
That low bar
Yeah.
to entry and exit
Mm-hmm.
versus a high bar, sticking with it,
Yeah.
figuring out, getting over those obstacles of relationship to
Mm-hmm.
build up like resilience in relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like there's so many things that fall apart
Uh-huh.
when we move to the digital world more than
Yeah.
the physical world.
And as you were talking, I was thinking, and disconnected.
Mm-hmm.
And these generations are as lonely as they could be, right? Just loneliness. There's not that togetherness in the digital world, you know.
And that's something that you learn through play as a child.
Uh-huh.
Like you learn even through facial cues. Like you're taking in so much information socially of what's acceptable, not acceptable, how to forge relationships, how to build trust, how to even like cultivate enjoyment in life. And what I'm even hearing there too is being in the present moment, because anxiety will pull us into the past or into the future, which also goes with the asynchronous element of everything being digitalized, rather than engaging in the present moment in a physical conversation and learning how to engage in relationship well with other people. And so much of that happens in play in childhood.
Yeah.
I'm really excited for the chapter on play.
Yeah.
It's going to be good because there's just a lot of depth and a lot of richness. Even what y'all just disclosed, I think is really good. And yeah, that there is hope, as we were kind of giggling earlier, that there is hope that the generations are going backwards a little bit and we're getting more, you know, I'm not going to offend other generations and say grandma, even though I feel very connected to that term, even though I'm not a grandma. But just going back to nostalgia of things that we used to do, that we used to consider fun, right? Playing outside, climbing a tree, right? Like just good old fashioned, go outside and find adventure, whimsical play, right? And so I do think that there's a lot of hope in going back to that. He does highlight 4 kind of foundational harms that result in these 2 challenges, right? Play and phone childhood. We don't have time to go through them, but we will in sequential chapters, right? Social deprivation, right? We talked about that. Kids are just not playing with kids like they used to, right? There's a lot of playing online. There's a lot of video games. There's a lot of interacting online that's happening versus physical, right? Sleep deprivation. I've only in the last 5 years valued sleep and put parameters around it, but you know, kids are on screens instead of sleeping, right? It's really distracting them. I mean, even how can y'all engage in that? And even in your own lives, right? We're not in the teens anymore, but that's really hard for even, right? All of us as humans, right?
I've started a practice. It's been like baby steps to get there. You know, the SMART goals of the small, measurable, achievable, of like moving my phone away from my bedside table and getting an analog clock, like knowing that that hour before sleep, that hour when you wake up, like protecting those parameters so that I actually have deep restful sleep. And again, that's been a journey. That's not something that is like, I've perfected this and I'm, you know, a master now, still working on it. But I do notice the nights when I like fall asleep on my phone, the next morning I don't feel as well rested, and I feel like I'm playing catch up even in the morning. Anyways, it takes intentionality to put those boundaries around like technology and its involvement in your life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Vital. Yeah. So that's a big one. I can't wait to talk about that one because there's so much updated science in the realm of sleep, specifically for teenagers and what that does to their mental health. And so that's a big one. Third, talks about attention fragmentation, meaning we just are not focused. And because technology pulls us in lots of different directions and buys our time and it's easy, we as humans will give it the attention, the power, and so therefore it takes away, we're fragmented, we're not in one place, we're all in 3 or 4 different places. He talks about in there, I believe this, reading, why reading is so hard. It's because it takes a lot of focus and attention to sit down and to get a book and to read it, right? And then lastly, addiction. People are increasingly showing signs of more addictive habits and the ways in which they're escaping. And I think addiction in this particular way is they're do not believe the DSM-5, right? That's what we're on.
Yeah.
Has classified a addiction of social media or technology yet. I do think it's in the makings of it because they're seeing so much harm that it's doing, right? But addiction being something that now video game screens rewiring the brain, the dopamine hits that the kids are getting, and again, it's not just kids. I don't want to put all the blame on kids and teenagers and parents. It's like, it's all of us, right? We're all getting these dopamine hits from this technology, that's really affecting us.
Yeah. Well, even as Mariah, you were reflecting on what you're developing a healthy relationship with your phone has looked like in your own life. I'm like, oh, there's such a pull, right? Like, there's such a pull toward the phone, and there's some realities of our humanity in that. Like, we are seeking that dopamine hit. We are going towards that. And I think one of the arguments of the book is that when that happens too early, too critically early on, is when it leads to different results than it does for an adult brain.
Yes, for sure.
And I think that's a really cool and empowering thing to realize that, like, yes, while we now have control, I mean, we get to choose how we interact with technology in ways that are healthy and build us up. Like, it's empowering to know that, like, oh, parents can be equipped to set their kids up for success in that season and their developing brains, and get to, like, even for those of us that did get to interact with a phone when there was no research, no information yet on what that would look like with a smartphone, there's still a lot of hope. We still can interact with it in ways that are healthy and fruitful, and choose when not to interact with it because it won't be healthy. And I think it's really empowering. I think it, like, grace and empowerment is so where we can land at the end of this book.
Yeah, I think we find ourselves talking a lot about kids because we're talking about an anxious generation specifically, but this is relevant to people beyond this generation and Gen Alpha coming afterwards. It's relevant for them because there is a rewiring of their brains, but for those of us who are, millennial and older, it's still relevant because of the just general health. We want to take a whole body approach to health. But we also want to model healthy boundaries with technology for those who are younger. I think especially thinking about kids in the house, if they, you're preaching one thing about technology, but the way that you unwind is by scrolling on your phone, or the way that you depend on social interaction is through your phone, then at the end of the day, the message is perhaps going to be missed. And so thinking about what can set this generation up for success, modeling healthy boundaries with technology in older generations is a huge piece of that.
Yeah, it is. And it's never too late as we sit here with technology open in front of us and going, technology's not the problem. It's us as humans, how we interact with it and choose to allow it to reframe and rewire us, our body, mind, and soul. And I think as, my generation, I have middle schoolers, going to have a high schooler soon, of going, it's my responsibility to frame all of it for them, because they're in their developmental stages. They're in a forming stage right now that's a really, me being the marriage and family therapist that I am, I put too much emphasis on those formative years because I know how important they are, right? But it's Ernest is on me to frame that for them. And that's all I can do. And then they're going to have to go out and launch into the adults and frame that in the way in which the choice that they will choose to. But I want to do my due diligence. And so I think it's really important for parents, no matter how old your kids are, to read this. So maybe you did all the video games and all the phones and everything, and you're just feeling all the guilt and all the shame and all the thing, I've done everything wrong. we've all been there, we've all made the mistakes of going, but again, I think you can reframe it for yourself because we never stop being parents.
Yeah.
And they never stop having that attention and focus on us. And so, I don't know, I think I'm excited for it. I think it's going to be a really good conversation in each chapter. And we all come from different experiences, different cultures. Being that we're all ladies and women, I think that that's going to give us, you know, a one-sided view of it. Because I do think men raising a little boy, they view technology a little bit different, and that's okay. So just kind of acknowledging that that side's not going to be spoken for here, but we'll do our best to try to ask around and speak into it. So good, I'm excited.